Matt Gowie is the founder and CEO of Masterpoint, an infrastructure as code agency focused on helping clients accelerate their infrastructure journey. Matt has over a dozen years of experience specializing in tech startups, AWS architecture, and cloud infrastructure, with some serious rock climbing thrown in the mix. In this conversation, we discuss IBM's recent acquisition of HashiCorp, the current state of open source, and break down a real Terraform to OpenTofu migration story.
All right, Matt, welcome to the illustrious and distinguished and just magnificent Cloud Gambit studio, or my home office, as I like to call it. Thanks for joining me. How are things going today for you?
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks. Things are going good today. I'm back-to-back meetings. I just snuck in a shower right before this. So, I was gross and sweaty from the gym earlier, and now, freshly clean, ready to go.
You didn't even have to shower. I mean, I can't smell you through the Zoom waves. So
I still put on deodorant, though. Yeah, no, it's all good.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you for coming on. And do you want to just briefly, introduce yourself to the audience? Who is Matt and what do you do day to day?
Sure. I call myself the CTO or CEO of Masterpoint. I wear like 5 different hats every day. So CEO, CTO, technical lead, I don't know. But yeah, I run a consulting firm called Masterpoint. There are 6 of us today, and we are focused on solving problems in the infrastructure as code space for clients. So we really Terraform, OpenTofu. We would love to do a Pulumi project. We're really deep in that space of automating, helping people understand what are the best practices, helping them get upskilled, and then making sure everything's on Rails. So that's what we focus on. And yeah, I think that's like the 20-second version of it.
Awesome. Yeah, starting a company is no small exercise. Usually it involves, vision, some great ideas and really great people. But the execution of that idea is really what, spins the tires, of course. What led to you sort of founding Masterpoint, and, what has been your, your experience, I guess, moving from, I think you did some sort of like director, a lot of software engineering in the past, things like that. But just your experience coming in as like a CEO and a founder, it's a different thing altogether over the past, 7 years?
Something like that. Yeah. It's been a fun journey. I think it definitely didn't start there with a lot of vision or anything of that nature. I basically was a software development manager in Seattle. I had a small startup that I worked at when I started my career and got out of school. And I worked there for a number of years, and that ended up getting acquired. I then went and moved to Seattle as part of that acquisition, ended up leading that team and grew it to like 12 people or so. And I had always wanted to travel. So, I think I caught that bug early when I was like 13. And when I looked at, hey, what am I doing? What's possible? I thought, okay, let me go and do solo consulting. I started Masterpoint in 2016 when I left that management gig. And I really was just doing whatever came my way. I was an application engineer, like full stack. I did voice user interface projects. I did, React projects. I did backend development. That was my way of doing the whole digital nomad thing. I did that from 2016. I was abroad for like around a year and a half. And then I came back to the States, and that, is when I started to work more in the DevOps space. I already had a bunch of SRE and cloud experience from my running a team and running a product. And that is when I realized like, oh, Terraform's amazing. This is a really cool tool. This actually makes me excited about DevOps. It makes me excited about building a platform for teams. And I started to focus there as an individual. And then, long story short, 2022, I was starting to feel burnt out as a solo consultant. I had a couple projects, and things were good, easy, but they were easy, and I didn't really have enough of a challenge. So I started to go hands off keyboard. I brought on a couple people, some part time, some full time, and then I've steadily, started to take on the CEO moniker, which that's where the vision has come in, and where we've like really developed our niche since then. And yeah, it's been a fun journey. A lot of going back to the drawing board and going, what am I doing? What are we doing now? Which has been fun, but I think we're on a good direction at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah. Constantly reinventing, yourself and your value and all those things. I love it.
Yeah.
That's a great story. And I didn't know this, but I was, creeping around on some of I think it was your LinkedIn or your GitHub or somewhere. And you saw that you were, like your side hobby, your side love, I would say, is rock climbing.
Yeah.
How did that start?
It starts like most people get into rock climbing, just like going to a gym. But it very quickly turned into a full-time passion. And yeah, I don't know. I think I am torn between, hey, what do I want to do more, is build a business, or, go out climbing as much as possible. And I try and find that line where, the business is doing well and I can get in climbing on the weekends, or take a trip. But yeah, that steadily ramped up. That happened, I got into climbing probably 2015, and that has become so a lot of my big life goals are around, hey, going to Patagonia, or going to the Bugaboos in Canada, or just doing some of the local stuff here in Rocky Mountain National Park. Like all my things I get really excited about outside of work are big alpine objectives, and climbing is just an amazing sport. It's really fun.
Yeah. It's amazing. You like you said, you travel around. How many continents have you been on? Have you climbed on?
Yeah, 5. And I'm excited to, cross off the 6th. But yeah, I've climbed all over except for South America, and of course Antarctica. I don't know if I'll ever cross off Antarctica, but I think I got to climb in Morocco with a partner of mine, and that was really fun. And I would love to go back and climb in Africa. I've climbed a bunch all over Europe and Asia, and yeah, it's been good. Spent
That's
a long
awesome.
time in Australia too.
That's awesome. Yes, I guess we better pivot and talk about the technical
That sounds
things.
good.
So let's pivot over to the elephant in the room, I would say, and that is the acquisition of HashiCorp by IBM, aka Big Blue, for a whopping $35 a share. Valuing the transaction right at like $6.4 billion all cash. What were your initial thoughts when you saw the news hit? Did you see it coming? And did you ever consider IBM as a suitor for HashiCorp?
I was pretty surprised, honestly, because I really thought that IBM and Hashi were like kind of against each other. Like particularly OpenBow, the fork of Vault, and Vault, for those that don't know, is HashiCorp's moneymaker. Like their enterprise agreement, their enterprise sales agreements for Vault are in the millions of dollars at like the low level. Like they start off really, really high, and people pay it. And but the OpenBow project, that is the open source fork of Vault, now that HashiCorp did the business source license change, the BSL change in August, that was supported by IBM. And IBM has been selling services around HashiCorp, and there's like the water cooler talk that the reason why HashiCorp did the license change was because of IBM. So we will never probably know until a couple of years from now, when somebody writes a book that we'll all have to read. I'm interested if Armand will ever do that. I would love to read it. But I was surprised, just because I kind of expected those two to be warring more than be in an acquisition type of arrangement. So it was a surprise. I think I have a lot of skepticism. I, don't have much of the experience with. Oh, I got a little thumbs up bubble there. But I don't have much experience with IBM or dealing with them, and I think that it's interesting to hear a lot of the people who work more with enterprises and mid-market folks that deal with IBM consultants or deal with the IBM products, deal with Red Hat. I've somehow escaped those issues in my career, and I think that there's a lot of fear that people have. So I'm a little bit skeptical just from what I hear from others, but we'll see. It should be interesting, coming 6 months, a year, 2 years to see how things evolve.
So, those are all great points. One thing I thought was interesting myself was like pre-announcement, HashiCorp stock was like trading like $25 a share. Like earlier this year, it tanked big time. It was like, I don't know if it ever went under $20 a share, but post announcement, IBM stock actually slid like 9%, which for IBM is probably like $20 billion. Who knows? And, I know that the quarterly earnings maybe had some sort of impact on that 9% slide, possibly, resulting from the financial overlords, like not, managing expectations and all those things, but all this aside, given the path that like HashiCorp was kind of on after IPO, post IPO, do you think this acquisition is like actually maybe a net positive? Like, is there a silver lining for HashiCorp, like IBM in the community, or is it just a bunch of unknown and, kind of skeptical waiting, if you will?
I think I didn't see one, and a good colleague of mine, Eric Osterman, who runs Cloud Posse, has like put out the possibility. At least he's the only person who I saw, mention this. But he was, saying that what his hope was is that, hey, maybe we get away from the business source license. Like maybe there's a merger between OpenTofu and Terraform now, and OpenBow and Vault. Like, is that the type of ecosystem that IBM wants to foster? Maybe that's what they're interested in. But I think that if there was something like that, that would be really cool, right? Like we could have, bridge the divide between the community break that got created when the BSL got mentioned or what came about. And I think that's who knows what's going to happen, right? Like who knows what IBM and Hashi execs are going to do, but like I wasn't thinking that was possible at all. And some people were giving some good ideas around that. And I think it's interesting. I think I don't know how these people think well enough, right? These executive types at these huge, massive companies, I will not even, say that I have a guess at what is their long-term plan or what they think is profitable. I know that IBM is a sales machine, and everybody, kind of acknowledges that and thinks that this could be a good fit because IBM can just crank up the sales dial for Hashi, and wish them luck. I don't know. It'll be interesting.
You made some really interesting points there, and the timeline is just so bizarre. So like if you think of like HashiCorp, they announced their license changes from Mozilla Public to Business Source, and like you brought up their Vault project. So IBM forks HashiCorp's Vault project, and I think it's even managed under the Linux Foundation, and then they come and buy HashiCorp. It's just such a weird or interesting turn of events. And I posted something like, oh, this is really big for IBM. I posted on LinkedIn and I was like, hey, maybe they'll change the license back. Maybe that'll be a thing. And I think it was Ned Bellavance that commented, and he said, yeah, maybe, or the whole thing was premeditated, and IBM wanted him to make that change. That way, HashiCorp can take that initial heat and
for
PR,
sure.
Before the big scoop up. It's hard to tell. Maybe if there's enough pressure from the community, it will drive them to change it.
Yeah. So far, the pressure from the community has not been a driver. But to what you're saying, I've heard that same thing, and maybe it was Ned that I, saw him comment somewhere else. But the it's interesting because there's these kind of opposing things that were happening, and I've heard that idea that maybe this was a precursor. Like these acquisition cycles for a $6 billion purchase are not they don't happen in a month or 3, right? Like the timeline could actually make a lot of sense, but overall it seems confusing. And I'll put it out there that I'm waiting for the book to be written about how this all went down from like the exec level, because I would read it, and I don't think I would say that about a lot of things, but I'm actually interested in this drama because it involves so much of what we do in terms of tooling. Hashi built some really great products, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if there's a book, I would get it too. I'd be first in line. Well, maybe not.
I wish I could invest in that.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? History is a great teacher. You can learn a lot from history, which is kind of what makes this situation confusing as well, because was it 2019 when IBM completed the acquisition of Red Hat? It seems like
something around there.
Time flies. It seems like it was like last year.
Yeah, that feels like it was a lot longer. I don't know.
So they completed this acquisition of Red Hat for $34 billion, and there was lots. I remember there was so much like assurances to customers and partners that, hey, IBM, they're going to remain deeply committed to open source and, deeply committed to the community. And, IBM actually did pay like a 63% premium for Red Hat. Like a lot of folks think they overpaid, but like I said, it's here nor there. But just last year, changes were made, for the Red Hat enterprise Linux source code availability, only to like paying customers. And there was that whole debacle that happened. So like, what do we take from that? And then you also look at IBM, and they're forking a project under the Linux Foundation at the same time. And then they purchase HashiCorp. So you have all these things just sort of in this whirlpool, and I think we're just gonna have to wait to see how it shakes out.
And that makes me think of the cycles come fast. Are we allowed to curse on the podcast?
Go for it.
Cool. Have you heard of the term enshittification?
Yes.
So it makes me think of that, because it's basically like, yes, somebody comes out with something, IBM buys Red Hat, and it's like promises to entertain, to keep, to build and grow a community. And there's lots of, hey, we're there for you. We're building this for you. We're going to be there for you. And then it comes down to earnings calls, and it comes down to, hey, what is this institution actually looking for? And, that things just get, the knob gets turned up, that money needs to be made. And big businesses can't really be, held to any sort of morals or standard, because they can just go, well, hey, we needed to improve shareholder value. And I think that's why it's so important to have things like the Linux Foundation and the CNCF. Like, there are reasons why projects should be within those organizations, and it really just keeps everybody honest and like on the same level. And that's what I try and support.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, honestly, so nobody wants to work for free. First of all, I've got 2 kids, another one on the way. Like, my oldest plays travel hockey, which is like, I might as well just go get another car payment. It's like more than that, So do you think like a successful model and sort of a bridge for open source and like the corporate interest is the idea of like many corporations pooling together and funding projects with the pivot of the project itself being managed by a foundation? I think that's the key there. That way, really, the corporate entity doesn't own it, but it still wins. A lot of organizations, everybody kind of wins.
They're still winning.
All the organizations benefit.
Yeah, I would love to see that happen more. I would love to see more bigger companies involved in donating to the Linux Foundation, and like really that sort of entity being really important. This makes me think of like, as the idea of like the future of open source. I think that there's just, with Hashi's license change, with Redis's license change, You know, I think that we're seeing this happening again and again, and we're kind of in a, you know, not a recession, but maybe like a down economy, right? There isn't any VC money happening. There isn't as much spend going on. People are holding on to their budgets. I think that from a community aspect, you know, I don't know if we can rely without really great fundraisers and without new careers coming up around, hey, let's build out how we convince these companies to contribute more to open source. I don't know how to solve that problem, but what the some of the cool stuff that I have seen come up is there's a project called T, and it's by one of the folks who was behind Homebrew. But it's this idea that, hey, you are paying into, you know, kind of a slush fund for open source, and open source projects get a ranking within how much they're used within package managers and registries, and then those open source projects are getting a cut of that slush fund that's getting created. And unfortunately, it's a big blockchain project. And I don't think that we've solved the usability problems that are around blockchain yet. And I honestly am not that big of a blockchain person. I think it's complicated, and, you know, it doesn't have that much utility yet. But I think that that sort of idea is where we as a community, whereas individual developers or smaller companies or, you know, groups of people who are running open source, they can see some sort of return. And I think that that might be a path down in the future where we're collectively getting together to say, hey, we all build on open source. We're all benefiting from this amazing work that people are doing. Like it all goes back to that like famous XKCD, which I feel like I've seen more in the past like year or two, where there's like the small block that everything else is built on. And we should all be contributing to support those people, support those projects and the teams that are building open source. And I hope to see more of that. And I think that there's like two sides to it. There's the like Linux Foundation needs more money. There's also like, hey, what can we do from a grassroots standpoint? And it's interesting. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's, so if you think about like some of these big, you know, the big companies out there, it's like, oh, they built a lot of their services on top of open source without really giving back and their origins. And it's one of those things where maybe they took it and they're using it. And like once, oh, we didn't have to pay for it, why are we going to go and try and fund and do things now? It's, you know, all the money.
Yeah. And it should just be a standard, right? Like it should be, there should be some bare minimum level of giving that you need to do. And it might not even be the big enterprises that, you know, need to make that change. Like I think you could end up relying on them a ton, but there's, you know, tens of thousands of mid-market businesses that, you know, have built so much on open source. And even if all of them gave a small percentage, it would make a huge difference. So, where's the open source tax? That's what we need.
There you go. I totally agree.
Yeah.
So we're going to pivot to, I think this is sort of what I like. All this other stuff was extremely interesting, but this has been like at the, you know, top of mind for me. But, you know, back in August, you know, last year, Terraform was obviously forked and OpenTofu was born. And I mean, it wasn't a clean and, you know, drama-free birth, you know, as no births are, as we've discussed, you know, but I happened to notice on the Masterpoint website that there was a blog. And in that blog, there was some words, and these words told a story about Masterpoint's first client transitioning from Terraform proper to OpenTofu. And it wasn't some small environment either. I actually wrote down on a sticky note so I could read it. It was 2,386 resources, 90 state files or, you know, workspaces, 39,000 lines of Terraform across 480 files. So that wasn't a science project. It was a legit big, you know, fairly sizable environment. Yeah. How did that go?
Went beautifully. We were surprised. I was surprised. I did that personally myself. And I expected it to kind of take a bunch of time, to hit a bunch of issues. I kind of, you know, was expecting, hey, this is going to be a beta type of a thing. But of course, hey, they're starting off from a fork. They're pending onto it. And they have a really strong team. The OpenTofu folks are all really smart and really involved. Like I think that the people who are backing that project, they really put some of their best people into what is becoming the awesome OpenTofu team. So they've done a really good job, and it went really smoothly as a result. What that blog post goes into for 30 or 40% of it is really about, hey, what did we need to change about how we automate Terraform, how we automate Tofu, and how does that look now that we need to pipe through that we're running a different command at the end of the day. And that was me doing some open source contributions. That was the majority of what I had to do to make it happen. But everything else just translated well, and we didn't have any breakages. We didn't have any major issues. And then since then, it's gone very smoothly. I think that the only complaints that I've had are around the Tofu registry, which has been the tiniest bit. Hey, I have to run another Terraform plan every 300 Terraform plans. Because the registry just wasn't able to download a module or a provider or something. And that's, in my book, considering how early it is not a big deal. So we've had good success with it. Yeah.
Trivial. Yeah, that's awesome. It's good to hear that. And I think one of the things for adoption for OpenTofu, like in a broader sense, is going to be, I'd say, evangelizing the success stories and talking about them to give confidence. Because I know when Terraform first hit the market, before it hit a 1.0 release, open source, and it was one of the few tools. Like, I worked in enterprise for a long time, and it was like one of the very few tools where it was like so valuable to like our infrastructure and dealing with infrastructure that we were allowed to bring it in and use it almost in like an unfettered sense. And now that it's morphed and matured, and you have this big company, and you have, they're negotiating SLAs and the managed services and all these things, it almost becomes like nobody got fired for buying HP or Cisco kind of thing. So we just want to go with the biggest player in the room. But as OpenTofu gets more valuable, and it sort of has maybe different innovation. And here's a good question. So do you think, like, is OpenTofu and Terraform, like, their paths are going to diverge, like, more and more over time?
Sure.
Do you think it's going to be harder to pull off, this sort of migration as smooth as it was for you, this go around?
Yeah. I think migrating back will be a different question. But like, with 1.7.0, OpenTofu just got released. It sounds like it's a direct port for, and not direct as in they copied code, but direct as in functionality, for some of the functionality that was newly released in Terraform 1.7. But there's some new opt-in features like state encryption, for example. I think if you do if you do the migration from 1.7 Terraform to 1.7 Tofu, you're not going to have any problems. To me, it sounds like we haven't upgraded yet, but we will soon. But the thing I think people could get themselves into a tight spot with is if they were to take on new Tofu functionality that's not in Terraform, and then if they ever needed to migrate back, and I don't know why you would at some point, but like, if you wanted to pay Terraform Cloud 5x what their competitors charge, then maybe you would need to move back from Tofu to Terraform, because I don't see Terraform Cloud supporting Tofu at any point in the future. But I can see some of those divergences being an issue if you're like, let's swap back and forth every week. But I can't see it being an issue if you're a stock standard Terraform shop and you're doing this one-time migration. I think it's just going to be easy. And I haven't heard anything that's like raised alarm bells for me in regards to, that'll be a divergence that'll actually break things. That hasn't come up yet. And it's still early, right? Like, I think maybe a year from now, when there's like a 2.0 version of both of these tools, we'll see some of those. And, people will need to have more complicated migration steps, and they'll need to work through that. But I don't see it today. And that's kind of a good thing if you're thinking about moving sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Those are good points. And as you already alluded to, like I think something that is amazing that we've all witnessed at this point is with this fork, is there's a gigantic, talented, and very motivated community that has rallied behind the OpenTofu project. And it's just been so, I think, pretty refreshing to see that,
It's been awesome
out in the community. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think that is the best thing about Terraform. It's what gets me excited about the project and the ecosystem is that, hey, there's a ton of open source. The providers are open source, the modules are open source, and people are doing a good job, of maintaining them and pushing them forward. That was the reason why Terraform got the adoption it did, and that's why I think the BSL license change was such a I think that HashiCorp did that license change more for Vault than they did for Terraform. At least that's what folks say. And yet, I think on the Terraform side, it's such a community ecosystem driven tool that it felt like a really, at least personally, it felt kind of like, what do you mean I can't use this tool that I've contributed into? I've been a part of this ecosystem for many years. What do you mean I can't use it with this vendor that's cheaper or what I prefer or what I'm using today? And that felt like a slight, right? Like that was that's why we all had so much opinions in the game. And I think that it's cool to see it on the OpenTofu side because you can see, hey, there's things moving. There's people that are passionate and pushing the envelope, moving things forward, and it's really cool.
Yeah. And so everyone has their own self-interests in these types of situations, of course. Usually like technical engineers, maybe the ones contributing to open source, they have a very different set of interests than corporate suits, that keep the business profitable and, kind of rolling forwards. But you do need to have both to be successful to some degree, of course.
Yeah.
To keep that ship, kind of moving. Do you see, is there any hope, like glass half full, of like a brighter future where the suits and the engineers can kind of coexist, without so much friction, especially with open source being in the news? It's just constant, the past 4 years.
I don't know. I wish I was more optimistic about that than I think I am. I think you can read. I always forget his name. The CEO of HashiCorp wrote an article that almost read like satire, to me at least, where he was talking about like the open source business model is dead, and we had multiple customers who were asking us to go towards the business source license, and it was like derogatory in a way that it was just kind of Trumpian almost. Not to get political, but like just he sounded kind of like Trump. And I just kept thinking like, hey, if you're the CEO of one of the most famous open source companies, HashiCorp, just built all these open source tools. They built a business off making great open source. If he's the CEO and he's saying these derogatory things about open source projects, and the business that he came in as CEO built itself on being open source, I don't have great feelings about it. I hope for the best. I would love to be able to make the case to more execs that, hey, this open source thing runs everything that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. But I don't. I personally haven't seen it, but I don't think I run in those circles that much. So maybe there's a whole ecosystem of like top level folks who are carrying the torch. And I wish I knew them. If any of them are on here and you want to chat, I'm always happy to. I wish I had a better answer there. But I feel like I'm a little bit jaded.
That's how I feel too. Because if history, again, back to history, it keeps happening and nothing really truly changes. You begin to become jaded on the whole thing. And and I feel like with I remember that I read that as well, and I remember thinking, like, okay, he didn't write this. Like somebody wrote it for him, and he had, he probably didn't even publish it. Like he just had to approve it. Like he probably didn't have a choice. But that's the game you play when you get up to that level and you IPO and you have a lot of public. You're beholden to shareholders and all these other things in the market. You go into a different machine altogether.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. I can be critical from my armchair here, but I'll be honest, I would not want to be in that position in the slightest. I wouldn't want to have to be beholden to shareholders. Like, I wish HashiCorp had never gone public. I wish, that would have been a better case in my mind. I think they would have done better as a business. And then maybe I wouldn't have lost a bunch of money on buying shares pretty early on, and then having to sell them around the BSL license change issue. But yeah, it's not an easy position to be in a public company for sure.
Yeah, I'm generally like a very positive, even like in bad scenarios, like glass half full, stay as positive as possible. But this is one scenario too where I'm just thinking like, okay, come on, is there a light somewhere?
Yeah.
Like, how is this gonna end up positive? Which is why like OpenTofu, that project is just so daggone refreshing.
Yeah, it's cool.
And yeah. So this has been great chatting with you, Matt.
I
really enjoyed it. I learned a little bit as well, which is nice. Do you want to tell the audience where to find you? Are you on any of the socials? I know you're on LinkedIn and GitHub, and I'll have those in the notes.
Yeah. I don't do the Twitter thing. I kind of got off of that, or X, whatever you want to call that. But yeah, really, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can follow me there. That's always good. We have a newsletter at masterpoint.io, and we're publishing blog content around infrastructure as code there. I've got some really smart people on my team who are helping me make that stuff happen, and some exciting stuff coming up ahead. So subscribe to the newsletter and check out the website, and follow me on LinkedIn. Stay in touch.
Awesome. And I will link the OpenTofu blog in the notes for sure, because that was a great blog. Into all the good details that you'd want to go into. It was fantastic read.
Awesome.
So
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Make sure and read it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.